Hello friends and welcome back for another episode of Indie Impressions. My name is Nick and today we're going to be checking out something very strange and a little bit confusing and a little bit beautiful called Xaxi. This is a very experimental, and I'm going to go over my side of the way I understand it and the way that I think it was intended to be understood. But essentially, this is a world that was designed to teach a synthetic language created for artificial intelligence research. And I know that's like already way over my head, so don't worry if you're not going to get all of this. But essentially, there's this virtual space that the developers have created here to try and confer meaning and help players understand and be able to maybe study a little bit to do with the possibilities of learning in memory and how that pertains to virtual environments. So that's, I think, what was intended to happen. And I started to do a little bit of research on what this language is about, and it's pretty wild stuff. Apparently, it was created back in 1998, so a while ago now, actually many, many years ago now. But it's a very complex thing, and I recommend you maybe look into it. It's called the Conlang Traume, and if I remember, I'll try and put a link in the description for it so you can read up. But what I thought that we were going to be actually looking at here today, and I'll start walking around so you can start to get a little bit of the graphical everything that's going into this. And please, anyone that has issues with epilepsy, I would say this is probably one of those seizure warning episodes. Gets a little bit flickery at times. But what I thought this was going to be is more of a study on how players map to virtual and abstracted, totally collapsed and broken apart environments. Because I think a thing that we kind of look past a lot of the time is that when we're creating a virtual world or creating environment mapping, there's basically no reason that we have to actually have anything that maps back to reality. We can end up with things that are basically just a garbled mess if we really wanted to, and what we choose to read into that is entirely up to the players. So that's why I think a lot of the time I find such joy in walking around very abstracted landscapes, because it really lets your imagination go a little wild with things. Sort of like the difference between seeing a perfectly mapped, like hyper-realistic or hyper-naturalistic, I suppose, 3D map of a face versus a very pixelated one that might be very much vague and lets you read into it and sort of map your own character onto it. Or even as it pertains to how in a storybook, there's some of the little details and quirks that the writer might leave out to let the reader actually put in some of their own information and create the story and make it theirs. So that's a thing that I think we kind of look past a lot of the time, and this is very much one of those very abstracted and surreal landscapes, and it's a beautiful color scheme, I have to say. It's basically this giant flooded field of what may as well be mercury on the floor, and then glitched out crazy terrain, which all just looks kind of like this satiny kind of beautiful, chic, chromized. I don't even know if there's proper words to describe all these things, but I don't know that I know them anyway. It's all just stretching off into infinity, and it's really completely up to us how we want to proceed through this environment, what we want to take away from it, and what its relevance even is. You'll notice there are occasional references back to reality. As you saw, there was that face there, but it was sort of wrapped around with, I don't know quite what, mechanical somethings that seem to be spinning around in circles, and I really don't know even what that would mean. So as far as how I want to even read into that artistically, I don't even really have a reference there yet either. But many of these areas seem to just be sort of open, mountainous terrain with particles floating around, and there's some really lovely shader effects here. It reminds me a lot of Memory of a Broken Dimension, another incredibly glitch-based game that I've looked at in the past, and one that I definitely recommend you check into if you're into this sort of a graphical aesthetic. There's not a whole lot else like it other than these two things. And if you notice there was a really cool rippling effect. It sort of seems like waves of electricity flowing through some of this stuff, and you'll see there's depth of field effects, there's the particles going on, there's the various shaders in the water, there's shaders going on the ground. Everything is sort of just alive in a strange and kind of difficult to articulate way. It's just its own situation, its own moment that I think you probably couldn't really create in any other medium, which is why I find this so fascinating. And also interesting that the developers chose to put in, this liquid sloshing sound and a ground sound of us walking, just to give the player a little bit more presence and materiality, if that's a word, in this actual space that we could very easily start to think, well, we could easily just be a transmission of data moving through it, or a specter of some kind. There's no reason why we have to actually have tangible presence in this reality. but we do, so that sort of lets us infer a few things. Now I'm noticing this character has a very hard time jumping up ledges, so I guess we're not going to be making our way up through here. But what I started to notice was these sort of seem a bit like files, and since we are sort of hearkening back to the concept of memory, there's a lot of things here that, well, you could sort of be perusing a dilapidated interior of a hard drive or something. This could be all some sort of rogue OS or something that could be designed to hold various forms of data. And I think that's a very interesting concept all in and of itself. Although it does make me want to start accessing things and interacting with things a little bit. It's a very bleak world that we're wandering through. Everything is very monochromatic. You know, shades of white to black, silver, just everything in there. There's not really any pops of real color, aside from maybe the ones that you could sort of imagine that you see out of the corner of your eye, or the ones that you might have wished you could see. Yeah, everything is just very much value, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a very cool aesthetic. And in fact, if I was to guess what one of the big, like, I don't know quite the way to phrase this, but like a theme that we could see trending towards futuristic aesthetics and things, that, you know, if you really want to make something look like futurism or high fantasy with regard to technology, I think this aesthetic certainly suits it very well. One thing that I would love to see, though, if there was to be any color introduced to this, I think just a little pop of light green, you know, some sort of a chartreuse, bright neon green floating around somewhere maybe inside of this landscape could be a very interesting reference as well. And I think I'm wandering around in circles here. There were a few other things to see, many of them not really naturalistic things we could map back to reality again, but still things that I wanted to run into nonetheless. And it's also very interesting to see that we can walk through these mountainscapes, and despite the fact that the ground is completely fragmenting apart, there is still something here that we can walk across. So there's a little bit of a discord between what we're actually seeing and what the reality of what we can interact with is. So I kind of wonder, like, where that actually, the mapping takes place there. Look at that, that's so cool. It's blurred out, yet it's also sharp at the same time. And then there's also this HUD going on in front of the player, which is very interesting as well, and I'm not really sure quite what this adds, other than maybe just to give us more of a reference, that we sort of seem like a drone or some sort of a probe or a cyborg or something, with the fact that there's this thing sort of targeting a reticle in front of us, or it is a reticle rather, and it's allowing us to frame the situation a little bit more, and it gives it a little bit more presence in terms of being sort of technologically based. Otherwise, you might very easily think you're just a human walking around in this, I suppose, which, not that there'd be anything wrong with that. It almost seems like we're walking through a broken virtual gallery as well, because there's just these pieces of, like, abstract installation art just randomly sitting around, which I think is very interesting as well. I love walking through places that just, they don't seem to have an intended purpose, but you make up the purpose for them. Look at that. I love the way that light shimmers off of it. And look at the horizon line with the bright white neon off in the distance, almost like there's something out there if we were to walk far enough. And who knows, maybe there actually is. It almost looks like there is, actually, as I see. There seems to be something popping up out there. I think we're going to have to walk out and find out what it is. It's not quite as far away as I thought it might have been. Oh, and that's really pretty off, just looking in the distance, too, and seeing all of this. The game doesn't seem to have any issues with frame rate problems either, which is very cool. Oh wow, out in the middle of nowhere there's just this character, which again harkens back to this, the language that I was talking about earlier. So that's what that was about. There's probably more of them out there somewhere. There isn't really anything to touch or really play with, though, which is the only downside. I kind of wish that this environment was a little bit more alive, that I could move some things around in it, that I could make the space my own, but then again, many of these sort of statements are often very well considered all the way through, so it could be sort of an emotional reaction that I'm having, which is, you know, part of experiencing this art experience. And this is very much more an art experience than a game, I would say, and I have no problem covering things like that, and hopefully you guys don't mind experiencing them with me. But that is one of the things that I like to curate when it comes to the content that goes up on my channel. I like having a little bit of art as much as I like having my games be there. It's sort of a combination, a hybridized bit of the two. And I do, excuse me, I do like the confluence of when those two things actually come together, when we can find a balance that's a little bit art and a little bit game. This one very much seems to be leaning towards the art side of things. This is just the structure here, too, and perhaps a filing system that we could be storing things within. It's very much the challenge of the human brain, right? That we're seeing everything we're seeing and we're trying to put it to reality. That seems to be the theme of this whole experience. What can we ascertain from the information that we're given, and how can we make it relevant to ourselves? And looking around, there's so little of it that we can make relevant that we start to really stretch for things, which is, I think, where we start to find some more relevant meaning to the concept of abstract art. It's really what we take in and what we choose to see it as. So look at this. There seems to be, and this is me making inference, there seems to be something that looks a bit like a brain buried under this mountain. I'm not really sure if it is a brain. It might very well be a large rock or something else that I can't quite even put my finger on, maybe an egg. But I kind of like to believe that it's a brain, because as we're talking about memory and understanding, I don't know, that seems to be kind of relevant. So we're making our own linear narrative through this situation. Love those reflections, too. It creates so many very interesting still shots if you were to just frame any one given moment of this. So I think there's only a few more structures that we haven't quite made our way over to yet, and that looks like another brain off in the distance, and I sort of want to believe that those lights on it are like synapses firing, perhaps, or that they were at least meant to evoke that. Not 100% sure, but of course with art, it is all subjective. And that's something to always keep in mind if you ever find yourself frustrated by some art that you're not quite finding understanding or meaning in. It is all entirely subjective. It is perfectly fine to feel frustrated about it. That might be the intended consequence of that art in the first place. You know, there are actually a lot of artists that are out there to create emotional response in you, even if that emotional response sort of feels a little bit like trolling at times. That is very much still the case in times, and I think there's nothing wrong with any way that you want to create art. So there seems to be, it almost seems like a overturned tractor trailer with very futuristic-looking ends on it, what would normally be doors that open up. So it sort of looks like solid, thick steel or something. Very industrial. And it's a stark contrast when you see something that's very structurally solid and stable versus everything else we see here, where the material, we're not even sure quite what the ground might be made out of here. It looks very flimsy, and it doesn't look like it would have much weight if you stepped on it, almost like it would break away like fragile paper that had been sitting and rotting for a while. But then it's also got this sheen to it, which is not really a thing that you would put that material to most of the time. So it's sort of a thing that's outside of our understanding, which is something I really do enjoy. And it's something that really spurs creativity and imagination when you find things that go together well, that don't necessarily make much sense. I think that's where we start to come up with new concepts and new structures for our methods of thinking. And look at this. This almost seems evocative of a desert all of a sudden, even though when we look in this direction, or if we look a bit closer to where some of the fragmentation is, definitely reads more like metal in this case. So we can go from, you know, loose grains of sand, little bits of broken down rock, to a solid metal surface all in one turn of your head. I really like that. So even though there's not a whole lot here to experience that is game-like, there's still a lot to talk about, and I really enjoy going through these sorts of experiences with you guys, so I hope you enjoy this as well. I think I'm probably going to wrap up the video at this point, though. I think we've pretty much seen most of what is available in this area. These monolithic black structures stretching into the sky are really cool looking as well. I would absolutely love to see a fully fleshed out world like this, and I think the closest thing we're going to get is probably either Fract, F-R-A-C-T, or Memory of a Broken Dimension, both of which very cool experiences. So if you like the aesthetic here, if you like the concept within, a more gamified version would be either of the two that I just mentioned. So go check this out if you want to experience it yourself. Surprisingly stable for a corrupted-looking game, I have to say. No frame rate drops, no crashes. I mean, that's a whole nother element that I suppose you could sort of immerse your player in if you wanted to make a meta level of what's going on with crashes and things. And there's also not a whole lot of sound, really. I mean, adding a little bit of extra sound could have really made things pop out a little bit more as we walked around certain structures, or even just having some very, you know, muffled, low undertones as far as background noise could also have been a very interesting approach, too. But the fact that it's not there is also a thing that bears, you know, observation. So, sometimes the things that are there and also the things that aren't are part of an art statement. So with that, I think I will leave you for another day. So go check this out. Link in the description, social media stuff in the description. If you enjoyed it, consider leaving a like and supporting the channel. And of course, if you want to catch more of these every single day, consider subscribing, because I post a new indie impressions video every single day without exception, very close to hitting the 2-year mark as well. So let me know what you think of this. I'd love to hear what you think in general about art concepts, what you think this might bring to that, and just in general, what kind of things that you might feel when you're looking at an experience like this, or do you just want to get to something more gamified, which is totally valid as well. So I will catch you all tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely night.